18 months after joining the Human Anti-Harvester Task Force, Caxathul stood in the command center of the orbital station, New Horizon, watching displays that would have been incomprehensible to his former self. Real-time tactical information flowed across multiple screens, showing harvester movements, human fleet positions, and allied force deployments across 17 different star systems. He no longer thought of himself as someone who had owned a human. Instead, he'd learned to appreciate the cosmic joke of that original assumption. Humans didn't make good pets because they weren't designed to be owned. They were designed to take charge of impossible situations and somehow make them work. The station around him was proof of that principle. New Horizon had been constructed in record time, using a combination of human engineering and galactic industrial capacity. It served as the coordination hub for the largest military alliance in recorded galactic history, bringing together species that had been enemies for centuries under a single operational command. Caxthul's role as Director of Interspecies Intelligence Coordination gave him access to information that painted a picture of the war's true scope. The Harvester threat was even worse than Admiral Chen had initially revealed. Their scouts had discovered evidence of Harvester activity in neighboring galaxies, suggesting that this infestation might be part of a cycle that had repeated across cosmic history. "Caxthul, report to strategic planning immediately," came the announcement over the station's communication system. The voice belonged to Commander Sarah Martinez, Admiral Chen's chief of staff, and one of the most efficiently terrifying humans he'd ever encountered. The Strategic Planning Center occupied an entire deck of the station, its walls lined with tactical displays showing every known sector of Harvester activity. Admiral Chen stood at the central holo table with Marcus, who had been promoted to colonel and now led special operations missions behind Harvester lines. "We've got a problem," Admiral Chen said without preamble as Caxathul approached. "Show him the latest intelligence." Marcus activated the holotable, which displayed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy's core regions. New red markers indicated Harvester presence in areas that had been considered absolutely secure just weeks earlier. "They've found a way to bypass our containment grid," Marcus explained. "Long-range stealth transports that can slip through our sensor networks undetected. 3 major population centers have gone dark in the past week." Caxthul studied the pattern of attacks, his intelligence training automatically analyzing the strategic implications. "They're not trying to hold territory. This is preparation for something bigger." "Agreed," Admiral Chen said. "Our xenobiologists think they're establishing staging areas for a coordinated strike against galactic infrastructure targets. Power generation facilities, communication networks, transportation hubs. Total civilizational collapse," Commander Martinez added grimly. "If they knock out the fundamental systems that hold galactic society together, they won't need to fight armies. Everything will just fall apart on its own." The magnitude of the threat made Caxthul's previous concerns about territorial disputes seem laughably trivial. This wasn't about trade routes or political influence. This was about whether intelligent life would continue to exist in any meaningful form. "What's our response?" he asked. Marcus and Admiral Chen exchanged glances that suggested they'd already formulated a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. "Operation Deep Strike," Admiral Chen said. "We're going to attack the Harvester's central coordination facility." She activated a new display showing long-range sensor data from the galaxy's edge regions. Deep in a sector that had been marked as completely Harvester-controlled, a massive structure orbited a dying star like some cosmic parasite feeding on stellar energy. "Intelligence suggests this facility coordinates all Harvester activities across multiple star systems," Commander Martinez explained. "Destroy it, and their ability to launch coordinated attacks should collapse entirely." Caxthul examined the tactical data with growing alarm. The facility was protected by what appeared to be the entire Harvester fleet. thousands of bioorganic vessels arranged in defensive formations that would make approaching it virtually impossible. "This is suicide," he said flatly. "Probably," Marcus agreed with disturbing cheerfulness. "That's why we're not going to attack it directly." Admiral Chen smiled with the expression humans wore when they were about to do something that defied conventional logic. "We're going to make the harvesters bring it to us." Over the next hour, they outlined a plan that was simultaneously brilliant and terrifying in its scope. Rather than attempting to fight through the harvester defenses, they would create a threat so significant that the harvesters would be forced to respond with their entire fleet, including the mobile command facility. The bait would be Earth itself. "You want to use your home planet as bait?" Caxthul asked in disbelief. "Not the actual planet," Marcus clarified. "We're going to fake an attack on Earth using technology that will make it look like we've discovered a weapon capable of sterilizing harvester biological systems. They'll have to respond with everything they have to prevent that technology from being deployed." Admiral Chen brought up detailed schematics showing how they planned to create false sensor readings that would suggest humanity had developed some kind of ultimate anti-harvester weapon. The deception would require coordinating multiple fleets across dozens of star systems, all timed to create a convincing threat profile. When they respond to defend against this fake superweapon, the real Allied fleet will hit their command facility while it's minimally defended, Commander Martinez explained. The plan required precise timing, perfect coordination, and luck that bordered on the miraculous. It also demanded that every species in the Galactic Alliance commit their remaining military resources to a single decisive battle. If it failed, there would be no second chances. "How long do we have to prepare?" Caxthul asked. 6 weeks, Admiral Chen replied. "Our long-range scouts indicate the harvesters are already beginning to mass forces for their coordinated strike. We need to move before they're ready." The next month and a half passed in a blur of logistical nightmares and diplomatic miracles. Caxthul found himself coordinating with species that had never cooperated on anything more complex than trade agreements, convincing them to commit their entire military forces to a plan that sounded like organized suicide. The Zephyrians contributed their fastest scout ships for reconnaissance operations. The Centaurians provided heavy assault vessels with enough firepower to crack planetary crusts. The Vorthans supplied logistics support and industrial capacity. Even the mysterious ethereal collective agreed to participate, offering technological assistance that pushed several ship systems beyond their normal operational limits. 3 days before Operation Deep Strike was scheduled to begin, Caxthul received a personal message that made him question everything he thought he understood about the situation. The communication came through channels that should have been impossible to access from his current location. It was signed with authentication codes that belonged to someone who had supposedly been dead for over 2 years. Agent Taxelar had been Caxthul's former partner in naval intelligence, killed during the same mission that had branded Caxthul a traitor. Seeing his codes in an active message felt like encountering a ghost. "If you're reading this, then the human alliance is probably preparing for their final offensive against harvester forces," the message began. "What they don't know is that the harvesters aren't the real threat. They're just the advanced scouts for something much worse." The message included data files that painted a horrifying picture of cosmic predation spanning millions of years. The harvesters were apparently one of several species that served a collective entity older than recorded galactic history. This entity consumed entire galactic civilizations, using harvester forces to weaken resistance before arriving to claim whatever remained. "The humans' plan to destroy the harvester command facility will work," Taxlar's message continued, "but it will also trigger a response from their true masters. I've been operating behind enemy lines for 2 years gathering this intelligence. The harvesters have been sending signals to something in extragalactic space. When those signals stop, the real invasion will begin." Caxthul stared at the data files with growing horror as he realized the implications. Humanity's plan would save the galaxy from the Harvester threat, but it would also announce their presence to something far worse than anything they'd faced before. The final lines of Thaxlar's message offered no comfort. "I don't think there's any way to prevent what's coming, but maybe knowing the truth will help someone figure out a way to survive it. Good luck, old friend." Caxthul sat in his quarters for several hours, wrestling with the decision of whether to share this information with Admiral Chen. The operation was too far advanced to stop, and the knowledge might only create panic without offering any practical solutions. In the end, he decided to trust the species he'd come to respect above all others. Humans had a disturbing tendency to find solutions to impossible problems, usually by redefining what was considered impossible. He found Admiral Chen in her private office, reviewing final operational orders with the exhausted expression of someone carrying impossible responsibilities. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I've received some intelligence that you need to see." She listened to Thaxlar's message without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful rather than alarmed as the full scope of the threat became clear. "Well," she said finally, "that explains why the Harvesters never seemed particularly interested in negotiation or conquest. They're just doing pest control for their bosses. You're not concerned about facing an enemy we know nothing about?" Admiral Chen smiled with the expression that had become familiar to anyone who worked closely with humans. "Caxthul, 3 years ago we didn't know Harvesters existed. 2 years ago, we'd never heard of galactic civilization. 6 months ago, we thought the Harvesters were the worst threat we'd ever face." She activated her personal communicator and began issuing orders with calm efficiency. "Operation Deep Strike proceeds as planned, but we're also going to start preparing for what comes after." "How do you prepare for an unknown threat?" "The same way we always do," Admiral Chen replied. "We gather intelligence, build alliances, develop better technology, and figure out how to turn our weaknesses into advantages." She paused and looked at Caxthul with something that might have been affection. "Besides, we've got you and agents like Thaxlar providing intelligence. We've got the entire Galactic Alliance working together, and we've got something that no previous galactic civilization has ever had." "What's that?" "Humans who are really, really good at breaking things that other people think are unbreakable." Operation Deep Strike launched exactly on schedule. The deception worked perfectly, drawing the entire Harvester fleet away from their command facility just as the Allied forces struck. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of Harvester coordination capabilities. As the Alliance fleets celebrated their victory, long-range sensors detected new energy signatures emerging from the void between galaxies. Something vast and ancient was responding to the sudden silence from its advanced scouts. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the distant energy signatures with calm interest rather than fear. "Time to get back to work," she said. Caxthul realized that he'd learned the most important lesson about humans during his time with them. They didn't solve impossible problems by avoiding them or finding ways around them. They solved impossible problems by making them someone else's impossible problems. And now, something that had consumed galaxies for millions of years was about to discover just how thoroughly humans could ruin a perfectly good extermination campaign. 6 months had passed since Marcus left with the human fleet, and Caxthul found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. The emergency beacon sat unused on his navigation console, a constant reminder of possibilities he wasn't sure he was ready to explore. His attempts to return to normal trading operations had been frustrating failures. Every exotic creature he examined seemed boring compared to the complexity he'd witnessed in Marcus. Every commercial transaction felt hollow after experiencing the genuine partnership they'd developed. Worst of all, The nightmares about harvester creatures had made him paranoid about traveling to remote systems where his most valuable customers usually waited. Everything changed when he received an encrypted message through channels he thought had been permanently closed to him. The transmission came from Admiral Vextar of Zephyrian Naval Intelligence, his former commanding officer who had branded him a traitor and ordered his execution. "Agent Cax Thul," the message began, using his old military designation. "Recent intelligence suggests you have made contact with a previously unknown species called humans. The Galactic Council has issued a Class 7 priority directive for any information regarding human capabilities and intentions. Your cooperation in this matter could result in the complete erasure of your criminal record." Cax Thul stared at the message display for several minutes, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. The Galactic Council rarely issued Class 7 directives unless they perceived a threat to interstellar stability. What had humanity done to attract such high-level attention? 3 days later, Cax Thul found himself in a secured conference room aboard the battlecruiser Sovereign's Edge, facing a tribunal of species representatives he'd never expected to see in the same space. Admiral Vextar sat beside a Centaurian war chief, a Vorthon trade consortium leader, and most surprisingly, a ethereal collective consciousness speaking through a crystalline avatar. "Agent Cax Thul," Admiral Vextar began without preamble, "explain your contact with the human-designated Marcus Chen." The formal use of Marcus's full name surprised Cax Thul. Clearly, the various galactic intelligence agencies had been busy gathering information. He chose his words carefully, knowing that his life probably depended on the next few minutes. "I acquired the human by accident during a commercial transaction that was interrupted by law enforcement. I initially intended to sell him as an exotic pet, but discovered that humans possess intelligence and capabilities far exceeding their apparent technological level." The Vorthon representative leaned forward, its multiple eyes focusing intently. "Elaborate on these capabilities." Cax Thul described Marcus's technical skills, his military knowledge, and most importantly, his ability to fight the harvester creatures that had been terrorizing the Outer Rim for years. The tribunal listened in silence until he mentioned the human rescue fleet's systematic destruction of the harvester mothership. "Confirmation of harvester elimination." The ethereal avatar spoke in harmonics that bypassed normal hearing and resonated directly in the listener's mind. "Human military vessels demonstrate technological advancement inconsistent with observed development patterns." The Centaurian war chief growled something in his native language before switching to Galactic Standard. "Our scouts have reported human fleets establishing forward bases in 17 different star systems. They're building a network of defensive positions that could threaten established trade routes." Admiral Vextar activated a holographic display showing the galactic spiral arm where Cax Thul had been operating. Red markers indicated known human positions, forming a pattern that made Cax Thul's blood run cold. "They're not just establishing random bases," he said, recognizing the strategic positioning. "They're creating a containment grid around something." "Explain," the Vorthan demanded. Cax Thul studied the display more carefully, his old intelligence training kicking in despite years of disuse. "Look at the pattern. They're not trying to control trade routes or claim territory. Every single base position is designed to monitor and intercept traffic coming from this central region." He highlighted an area of space that appeared empty on most star charts, but had been the source of numerous disappearances over the past few years. "The harvester breeding ground," he concluded. "Humans aren't expanding aggressively. They're quarantining a threat that the rest of us have been ignoring." The tribunal exchanged glances that suggested they'd reached similar conclusions through their own analysis. Admiral Vextar deactivated the display and fixed Cax Thul with a stare that brought back uncomfortable memories of military briefings. The Galactic Council has authorized a joint task force to investigate human intentions and capabilities. You will serve as our primary liaison due to your unique experience with their species. Before Cax Thul could object to being voluntold for what sounded like a suicide mission, alarms began blaring throughout the battlecruiser. The conference room's displays switched to external sensors, showing a sight that made every being present freeze in terror. A harvester fleet was emerging from hyperspace barely 2 light minutes away. Not the single scout ship that had attacked Cax Thul months earlier, but a full invasion force comprising dozens of the massive bioorganic vessels. Their hulls pulsed with malevolent energy as they began deploying clouds of smaller attack craft. "Battle stations!" Admiral Vextar commanded, but everyone in the room knew that the Sovereign's Edge and her escort ships were hopelessly outmatched. The Harvester fleet was easily 10 times larger than anything the Galactic Council had ever assembled. Then space around the Harvester formation began flickering with the distinctive distortions of ships dropping out of hyperspace. Human vessels materialized in perfect formation, their sleek hulls already glowing with charged weapons systems. Cax Thul watched in fascination as the human fleet moved with precision that seemed almost telepathic. They didn't communicate over open channels or waste time with formations. Instead, they immediately began executing complex tactical maneuvers that split the Harvester force into manageable segments. "How are they coordinating without visible communication?" the Centaurian war chief demanded. "Quantum entanglement networks," Cax Thul said, remembering conversations with Marcus about human military technology. "Their command computers are literally connected at the subatomic level. Perfect real-time coordination across unlimited distances." The battle that followed lasted exactly 17 minutes. The human fleet systematically dismantled every Harvester vessel using weapons that seemed to disrupt the aliens' biomechanical integration. When the last Harvester ship exploded in a brilliant cascade of organic matter and twisted metal, the human fleet reformed into parade formation and waited. A single communication came through on standard galactic frequencies. The voice was calm, professional, and speaking accented but clear galactic standard. "Galactic Council vessel. Sovereign's Edge. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Deep Space Fleet. We detected Harvester incursion signatures in your vicinity and responded accordingly. Are you in need of assistance?" Admiral Vextar looked around the conference room with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. After a moment, he activated the communication system. "Admiral Chen, this is Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Naval Intelligence Division. We appreciate your intervention. We were not aware of your fleet's presence in this sector. We maintain patrol routes throughout this region to prevent Harvester breakouts. Our intelligence indicates that your vessel contains a being named Cax Thul, who had contact with one of our personnel. We would like to request a meeting." The casual way Admiral Chen mentioned Cax Thul's name suggested that human intelligence gathering was far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Cax Thul found himself wondering just how much the humans knew about galactic affairs. 2 hours later, Cax Thul found himself in the Sovereign's Edge's main hangar, watching a human shuttle dock with movements so precise they looked computer-controlled. When the airlock opened, Admiral Chen stepped through, followed by an honor guard of human soldiers whose equipment made standard galactic military gear look primitive. Admiral Chen was clearly related to Marcus, sharing the same build and eye color, though her bearing suggested higher rank and more political experience. She greeted the galactic representatives with practiced diplomacy before turning to Cax Thul with obvious curiosity. "You're the merchant who helped my brother survive his first encounter with Harvester forces," she said. It wasn't a question. "Marcus is your brother?" "Twin sister, actually. He spoke very highly of you in his debrief reports." Admiral Chen studied Cax Thul with the same unsettling intensity he remembered from Marcus. "He also mentioned that you might be interested in joining our anti-harvester operations." Before Caxthul could respond, Admiral Vextar interrupted with barely concealed frustration. Admiral Chen, the Galactic Council requires clarification regarding human territorial expansion and military capabilities. Admiral Chen turned to face the galactic representatives with an expression that somehow managed to be both respectful and completely dismissive. Admiral Vextar, with respect, the Galactic Council's territorial concerns are irrelevant. Humanity has been fighting the Harvester threat for over 2 years, while your various governments argued about jurisdiction and trade agreements. We've lost 17 colonies and approximately 2 million civilians to Harvester attacks. The casual way she mentioned such massive casualties sent a chill through the assembled representatives. The entire population of some galactic member worlds was smaller than humanity's losses. We're not interested in your trade routes or political territories, Admiral Chen continued. We're interested in preventing the Harvester Collective from consuming every intelligent species in this galaxy. Whether you help us or not is entirely your decision, but we will continue operations regardless of galactic political considerations. The Vorthan representative managed to find his voice first. You're claiming authority over interstellar security matters without galactic mandate. We're claiming responsibility for a threat that your governments have been ignoring for decades. Admiral Chen activated a portable holographic display that showed the galaxy from a perspective none of them had seen before. Red zones marked Harvester-controlled territory, spreading like an infection across several spiral arms. Green zones showed human defensive positions and cleared sectors. Everything else was marked in yellow, indicating areas where Harvester presence was suspected but unconfirmed. This is the current tactical situation, Admiral Chen explained. Harvester forces control approximately 30% of this galactic region and are expanding at an exponential rate. Based on our analysis, they'll achieve critical mass within 5 years unless active countermeasures are implemented. Critical mass? The Ethereal Collective asked. The point where they have sufficient resources to launch simultaneous attacks against every major population center in the galaxy. After that, resistance becomes impossible. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long as the galactic representatives absorbed the implications. Finally, Admiral Vextar spoke with the tone of someone accepting inevitable reality. What do you need from us? Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly, suggesting that cooperation had always been her preferred option. Intelligence sharing, logistics support, and safe passage for our patrol fleets. In return, we'll provide technological assistance and coordinate joint operations against Harvester targets. She turned back to Caxthul with something that looked like anticipation. We're also recruiting individuals with specialized knowledge and unique skill sets. Former intelligence operatives, for example. Caxthul looked around the conference room at representatives of civilizations that had branded him a traitor and hunted him for years. Then he looked at Admiral Chen, whose brother had trusted him despite having every reason not to. The choice was surprisingly easy. When do I start? Zephyrian merchant Caxthul had seen many strange creatures in his travels across the galaxy's outer rim. His floating market pod drifted between the lawless frontier worlds where anything could be bought, sold, or traded. Exotic pets were his specialty, and his reputation for acquiring the most unusual specimens brought customers from 3 different star systems. The human had been a complete accident. Caxthul remembered the day clearly. He'd been negotiating with a Vorthan slaver on Kepler Station when the deal went sideways. The slaver's ship had been raided by peacekeepers just as they were loading cargo. In the chaos that followed, Caxthul found himself with an unmarked stasis pod and no paperwork to explain its contents. Most merchants would have dumped the pod into space rather than risk customs trouble. But Caxthul's curiosity had always been stronger than his common sense. When he cracked the seal in his ship's cargo bay, he discovered something that made his four hearts skip several beats. The creature inside was unlike anything in the galactic databases. It stood upright on two legs, had pale skin stretched over lean muscle, and possessed the strangest eyes Caxthul had ever seen. They were blue like the deep oceans of Altair 7, and they held an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through him. The human spoke in a language that his translator couldn't immediately process. After 3 days of patient work, the device finally began parsing the creature's words into something resembling meaning. The first thing the human said that Caxthul could understand was a question that chilled him to his bone marrow. "Where am I? And who killed my crew?" Caxthul quickly discovered that humans were far more complex than any pet he'd ever owned. This one called itself Marcus, and it possessed knowledge that seemed impossible for a supposedly primitive species. Marcus could fix broken machinery with nothing but spare parts and determination. He understood stellar navigation better than some trained pilots. Most unsettling of all, he seemed to be studying Caxthul just as intently as Caxthul was studying him. The merchant had initially planned to sell Marcus at the next major trading hub. Humans were completely unknown to galactic civilization, which meant collectors would pay astronomical prices for such a unique specimen. But as the days passed, Caxthul found himself growing oddly attached to his strange acquisition. Marcus never tried to escape, though Caxthul was certain he could have managed it easily enough. Instead, the human seemed content to help around the ship. He organized the cargo hold with ruthless efficiency, repaired systems that had been malfunctioning for years, and even improved the engine's output by 15%, using modifications that shouldn't have been possible with their current technology. "You're not really a merchant, are you?" Marcus asked one evening as they shared a meal in the ship's galley. Caxthul had grown comfortable enough to remove the neural restraint collar, though he kept the control device close at hand. The question caught Caxthul off guard. "What do you mean?" "Of course I'm a merchant." Marcus smiled, an expression that still unnerved Caxthul despite weeks of observation. "You handle yourself like military. Your ship has weapon modifications that no civilian would need, and you're way too good at reading people to be just a simple trader." Caxthul's feathers ruffled involuntarily. How had this creature figured out what he'd spent decades hiding? "I don't know what you're talking about. Former intelligence officer, maybe? Or special forces?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, those unsettling blue eyes never leaving Caxthul's face. "You're running from something. Or someone." The accuracy of the human's assessment sent a cold wave through Caxthul's system. He'd been a deep cover operative for the Zephyrian Naval Intelligence Division until a mission went catastrophically wrong. Now he was a wanted fugitive, hiding in the galaxy's forgotten corners while his former employers tried to eliminate any trace of their failed operation. "How could you possibly know that?" Caxthul demanded. Marcus shrugged, another peculiar human gesture. "I recognize the signs. I used to be military myself before I ended up in that stasis pod." Over the following weeks, Caxthul learned more about human military capabilities than he'd ever wanted to know. Marcus had been part of something called the Terran Colonial Marine Corps, specialized in what humans euphemistically called hostile environment operations. According to Marcus, his unit had been investigating strange signals from an uncharted star system when they encountered something that wiped out his entire team. "We weren't the first humans to disappear out there," Marcus explained during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. Ships and colonies had been vanishing for months. Command finally decided to send in the specialists. "And what did you find?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Something that shouldn't exist. Something that harvests entire civilizations for reasons we couldn't understand. My team managed to plant enough antimatter charges to sterilize the facility, but I was the only one who made it to the escape pods." The implications of Marcus's story troubled Caxthul deeply. If humans were capable of fighting unknown threats that could eliminate entire civilizations, what did that say about their species as a whole? And more importantly, what kind of enemies had they made? Caxthul's questions were answered 3 months later, when his ship's sensors detected an unusual energy signature approaching their position. The readings didn't match anything in the galactic databases, but Marcus took one look at the display and went completely rigid. "We need to run." "Now," Marcus said, his voice carrying an urgency that made Caxthul's survival instincts scream warnings. "What is that thing?" "Harvester scout ship. They're the ones who took my crew." Marcus was already moving toward the weapons locker, moving with a fluid efficiency that reminded Caxthul why he'd suspected military training. "They must have followed my trail somehow." The approaching ship was massive, its hull covered in organic-looking protrusions that pulsed with sickly bioluminescent light. As it drew closer, Caxthul could see smaller craft detaching from its surface like parasites leaving their host. "My ship can't outrun that thing," Caxthul said, fighting down panic as he watched the alien vessel gain on them. Marcus had found the emergency weapon kit and was checking the charge on a plasma rifle with practiced motions. "Then we make a stand. But first you need to send a distress signal on this frequency." He rattled off a series of numbers that meant nothing to Caxthul. "What frequency is that?" "Human Military Emergency Channel. If there are any of our ships in this sector, they'll respond." Caxthul programmed the signal into his communications array, though he doubted any human vessels would be close enough to help. As far as he knew, Marcus was the only human in this entire region of space. The first Harvester fighter reached them just as Caxthul finished transmitting the distress call. The smaller craft attached itself to their hull with disturbing wet sounds, and something began cutting through the airlock with tools that seemed to dissolve metal rather than cut it. Marcus positioned himself in the corridor leading to the airlock, his weapon trained on the sealed door. "When that opens, stay behind me and keep your head down. These things don't take prisoners." The airlock exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. What came through the breach barely looked alive. The Harvester was a nightmare fusion of flesh and machinery, its movements unnaturally fluid as it scanned the corridor with sensors that might have once been eyes. Marcus opened fire without hesitation, his plasma rifle painting the walls with brilliant purple light. The Harvester staggered under the assault but kept coming, its form shifting and adapting to absorb the energy weapon's impact. Just as Caxthul was certain they were both about to die, the ship shook violently as something massive impacted the Harvester mothership. Through the hull breach, he caught a glimpse of sleek vessels with unfamiliar markings engaging the alien craft in brutal close-quarters combat. "Looks like cavalry's here," Marcus said with grim satisfaction as he put 3 more plasma bolts into the Harvester's center mass. The creature finally collapsed, its hybrid flesh smoking and twitching. More explosions echoed through space as the human ship systematically dismantled the Harvester vessel. Within minutes, the alien threat had been completely eliminated, leaving only debris and the acrid smell of burned electronics. A new voice crackled over the communication system, speaking in the same language Marcus used. After a brief exchange, Marcus turned to Caxthul with something that might have been regret. "They're here for me," he said quietly. "My people have been looking for survivors from the original mission. Looks like my beacon finally reached them." Caxthul felt an unexpected pang of loss. Over the months they'd traveled together, he'd grown to think of Marcus as more than just an exotic pet or valuable cargo. The human had become something dangerously close to a friend. "You're leaving?" Marcus nodded. "I have to. There are things about the Harvesters that Command needs to know. Information that could save a lot of lives." As they waited for the human rescue ship to dock, Caxthul found himself wondering what would happen next. His criminal past, his fugitive status, his former career as a spy, All of it seemed trivial compared to what he'd learned about the universe's hidden dangers. "What will you tell them about me?" he asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "That you're someone who can be trusted, someone who helped a human when you didn't have to." He paused. "Someone who might want to consider a career change." Before Caxthul could ask what that meant, the human rescue team had boarded his ship. They were polite but efficient, treating him with surprising respect as they collected Marcus and the Harvester corpse for analysis. As the human ships prepared to leave, Marcus handed Caxthul a small device that looked like a modified communicator. "What's this?" "Emergency beacon. Humanity is setting up operations in this sector to deal with the Harvester threat. If you ever need help, or if you want to discuss that career opportunity I mentioned, just activate it." Caxthul watched the human ships disappear into hyperspace, leaving him alone in the vast emptiness between stars. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what his next move should be.